All right, awesome. So thanks everyone for your attendance today. My name is Jason Hall. I'll be running you through today's Upsolver workshop. These workshops are really designed to help you all get hands-on with the product rather than kind of sitting through a demo. A lot of customers tell us that they really learn most about a product when they can actually use the product in a hands-on scenario. So that's really the goal and objective of today's session. We are recording this call, so we will be sharing the recording to anyone who might need it after we wrap up. And if you let us know after the fact, we'll make sure that we make that available. And again, really the objective is that all of you walk away from today's session with a good understanding of Upsolver, specifically its value proposition, its architecture and components, and the way that we build ingestion pipelines. And we're going to do that with some hands-on exercises. So all of you will hopefully be following along with me today. And the result of today's workshop is that we will build 2 end-to-end ingestion pipelines. The first pipeline that we build is going to read data from S3. We'll be working with kind of a medium-sized sample data set today that sits inside of an S3 bucket. And we'll be ingesting raw data into a Snowflake data warehouse, right? We'll kind of focus on the simplest way to ingest S3 data into Snowflake. After we build out that pipeline, we'll take a look at Upsolver and specifically how we can observe the quality of the pipeline itself, as well as the data that's ingested. So observability is a big component of Upsolver's value proposition, and we'll make sure you have the chance to see that in action. And then the second pipeline that we build will work with the same data set that we used in the first example, but we'll look at how Upsolver can apply transformations and expectations at ingestion time to improve the quality of the data that's ingested. So you can kind of tell almost like a real world use case here of pointing to some raw data, ingesting it, determining some problems with that data, and then seeing ways that Upsolver can fix those problems, right? And that's really the exercises that we'll be going through during today's workshop. For those of you that haven't come across Upsolver before, if this is your first time with us, first of all, thank you for taking the time today. Upsolver, as an introduction, is a platform, an ingestion platform designed to help customers very simply work with high-scale data. You know, the high-scale data implying data that's both large in its volume, you know, working with data sets at the terabyte, even petabyte scale. Also data that's highly complex, you know, data like real-time event streams, semi-structured data on S3, databases, you know, relational database tables of millions of rows that need to be ingested in near real time. That's the type of data that Upsolver is designed to work with. And the idea is that we can make ingesting that type of data, that type of high-scale data into your data warehouse or data lake very simple. Right? So it's a kind of a combination of scale and simplicity. And that's what we'll be looking to get across during today's workshop. As far as logistics of the workshop, since I recommend and hopefully encourage all of you to follow along with me today, I do recommend 2 monitors if you have them. If you don't, that's fine. You can certainly make do with whatever you have. But if you do have a second monitor, it's not a bad idea to put Zoom over on one of them. I'm going to be doing a lot of sharing out of my screen and sharing out of slide content and asking you to follow along. So if you have 2 monitors, put a browser on one and then put Zoom on the other, and that'll allow you to follow along side by side. We have muted everyone's phone line for the quality of the recording and to minimize distractions, but we do want to encourage Q&A. So if you do have questions as we go through the content, you can find the Q&A button in Zoom, and you can go ahead and ask me any and all questions that you have, either about an exercise that you're stuck on or something that you might need clarification on, or if you certainly run into any problems or fall behind. Leverage the Q&A function. I will be monitoring that in real time. I'll do my best to address any questions as they come up, and those that I can't get to during the workshop itself, I'll stay around as long as I need to after the session to make sure that I address and answer any and all questions. I am going to send out a copy of this deck in a few minutes through the chat of Zoom. So if anybody does need to reference any of the slide material, either during the session or after the session, you will have a copy of the deck. Keep an eye out on the chat window of Zoom, and you'll see that come through in just a minute or so. And if you do want to reach out to me after we finish the workshop, I very much want to encourage that. You'll see my email address down there at the bottom, jasonhall@upsolver.com. Feel free to reach out to me directly with any comments or feedback or questions about the workshop content today or anything Upsolver related. And we'll also be sharing out with you a link that you can use to join our Slack community, which is another great resource for interacting with Upsolver employees and customers. Fairly active user community of Upsolver developers and architects and users that can be able to address and help with any sort of scenario that you might need help with. So with that said, I'm going to do two things right now. The first is I will send out that link that includes the slide deck. If you keep an eye on the chat of Zoom, you should see that. Go ahead and click on that link or copy and paste it into a browser. That'll get you to the slide deck that I'm currently presenting from. There's a few links in the slide deck that'll be helpful for you to navigate to, as well as some things that I'll be asking you to copy and paste out of the deck as we go through the workshop. So having the deck handy, I think, will help as we go through the exercises. I'm also going to, send through the first step in the workshop, which is to sign up for SQL Lake. And I will paste that link into the chat of Zoom as well, if you want to click to get into the sign up page. Signing up for SQL Lake or Upsolver is very simple. We just need an email address and a password. There's no extra contact information needed and no billing information, just a username and password. I will recommend, if you already have an account to Upsolver, either a production account that you're using within your environment, or if you've gone through workshops or trials before, it's not a bad idea to set up a dedicated account just for the purpose of this workshop. That'll make sure that you've got a clean, fresh environment with no conflicts on the connections or pipelines that we're building. You can, of course, use a personal email address if you have one that's separate from your existing Upsolver account. The other option is, if you have an existing Upsolver account, you can use this plus syntax after the username and before the email alias to create a fresh account associated with the same email. So for example, I could create an account called Jason Hall plus workshop at upsolver.com, and that would give me a fresh, clean account that I can go ahead and use for the purpose of the workshop. Okay. So that's step one in the workshop, is to get signed into an account, and that'll get you an Upsolver account running in the Upsolver cloud that we can use to go through the workshop exercises today. This is the first time I'm going to pause here in the session. I do like to mention, if you do fall behind in the workshop, it's a little tricky to catch up. We do tend to move fairly quickly. So I am going to pause periodically just to make sure that everybody's kind of caught up with where we currently are. So I'm going to launch a poll in Zoom, basically, that just asks if you're ready to proceed. Ready to proceed would mean that you're signed up, you've got an account, and you're at the homepage to Upsolver, which should look something like the slide that I'm now presenting, a little rocket ship with a button that prompts you to ingest your first data set. It looks like just about everybody is caught up. I do see a few that are not. If you have run into any problems or have gotten any errors or anything like that, feel free to send a question through in Zoom and I'll do my best to address it. But looks like the majority of you, almost everyone, is caught up. So I think we should be ready to proceed. I thank you for answering that poll. I will ask a few more times as we go through the content, just as a way for me to make sure that everybody is caught up and following along. So a couple prerequisites. Today, we are going to be working with Snowflake as a data warehouse. Upsolver does support additional data warehouses, and you're certainly welcome to try those out on your own. But for the purpose of today's workshop, we're going to be working with Snowflake. You have three options to connect to Snowflake. One option is to use your own Snowflake connection. If you're an existing Snowflake user and you want to leverage your own Snowflake deployment, that would probably be the preferred option. That way you can kind of view our ingested data alongside your existing deployment. In order to connect to Snowflake, we really need just 5 pieces of information. The first is a host name that is made up of a JDBC connection string with a host name, database name, and warehouse name as parameters in that connection string. Should be able to get that simply from the URL that you use to connect to Snowflake. And then we just need a username and password that can connect to Snowflake and create objects in the schema that you write to. So it doesn't need any elevated permissions, but it will need permissions to create a table inside of a schema that you define during your ingestion. If you don't want to use your existing Snowflake account, that's fine. We certainly understand. You can sign up for a trial at snowflake.com. Snowflake, I think as of today, provides 30-day trials. Very easy to get started. Probably take you about 30 seconds or so to fill out a simple form. It'll launch you a trial data warehouse, and you can use that for the purpose of this workshop. Or the third option is that we will be providing, well, we are providing a connection that you can use during this workshop. You'll see the host name, username, and password here in the slides. We'll be asking you to copy and paste that into Upsolver here in a few minutes. And you're certainly welcome to use that for today's workshop. We will leave that connection active for a few days, certainly through the end of the week. So if you do want to continue your use of Upsolver using that connection after we wrap up the workshop, you'll have a few days to do so. But that connection will not be available forever if you are watching this recording and it's more than a week or so after today's workshop. Good chance that that will not be available anymore. So again, the trial option is good, or of course you can connect to your own Snowflake deployment. Right? We'll be referencing the Snowflake connection details here as we go through the workshop pipeline. So with that said, we'll go ahead and launch our first ingestion pipeline. We'll do that by choosing a source and target in the ingestion wizard. So click on the button to launch your first data ingestion. You'll see our sources and targets will be presented to you. And the two that we're going to be working with today, we're going to be using a source, which is S3. It's a S3 bucket that we're providing for the use in this workshop, and Snowflake again, and we'll be filling out connectivity details to Snowflake during the ingestion configuration. So click S3, click Snowflake, and then click Next. Now the wizard has three components to it. The first two are going to be creating our connections, and then the third will be configuring our ingestion. So on step one, we'll create a connection to an S3 bucket. And you'll see, for those of you that have the slides handy, again, I shared out the slides in the chat of Zoom. If you haven't already referenced the link, find the chat in Zoom and find that first link to a Google Doc. And you'll see on slide, what is it, slide 10, you'll see the connection details for S3. Right? So you can give your connection a name. You can name it anything you want. I do recommend using the name provided. That'll just make copying and pasting easier later in the workshop. And you'll see an AWS role that you need to provide that gives you access to that sample S3 bucket. Right? Now I'm going to follow along with you here. So I'm going to go ahead and step through the ingestion wizard myself. And I will select S3 as my source, Snowflake as my target. And we will create an S3 connection here. You know what? Pardon me, I am going, you know what? I'll just reuse the connection. I didn't clean up after this morning's workshop, so my connections are actually already created. But let me go back into the ingestion process, S3 to Snowflake. I will create a new connection. We'll call this Upsolver S3. I'll just call it PM workshop. And I will paste in that AWS role. So just copy and paste the AWS role into the role field. Then you'll see a button here that says test and continue that will verify connectivity to the bucket. You should see a little green checkbox, and that should indicate that Upsolver can successfully connect to the bucket provided. Right? So go ahead and step through the connection form and verify that you can connect. Step two here is we're going to select a bucket that we're going to read data out of, and we're going to choose this Upsolver samples bucket. There's a few buckets in that connection, but we're going to read data from the Upsolver sample bucket. And the location that we're going to be reading from is this folder called Orders with Evolution. Right, there's a few that you play around with after the fact here, but the Orders with Evolution location is what we're going to read files out of in this S3 connection. So click on the folder name there, Orders with Evolution. Now, if you scroll down here, you can see the automatic option is the content type that's configured by default. The automatic option will do its best to identify what type of files are in that location and proceed accordingly. You can, though, click on that drop down and see that we do support reading data from lots of files, right? So if you have CSV or Parquet or Avro, JSON, you can specify a content type, pretty well supported just about anything that you might have file-wise. But I'll choose the automatic option, which allows Upsolver to determine what types of files and proceed accordingly. And then if you scroll down, you'll see in step 3, we simply do some verification and previewing. So we preview that we were able to find a few files in that location. Looks like we have at least 5 of them. Okay. And if you scroll down further, you will see that we preview some events inside of that location. All right, so you can basically find some that we've successfully parsed 100 events within those JSON files. We parsed all of them successfully. If you're interested, you can click through those events, see what sort of data that they contain, and then that will allow you to just kind of verify that the files contain the information that you think that they contain. So assuming everything verifies successfully, you can click next and proceed to the second step of the wizard. Now, the second step is the Snowflake connection. And actually, it looks like we've locked out a user account. So I'm going to give me 1 second. I'm going to unlock that account. It's never happened before. Let me go into my admin. I am going to go into users, and I am going to unlock this workshop user account. I think I need to do that by resetting the password. Let me try setting it to the same password. May or may not let me, but let's try that first. Okay, needs to be different. So let me update the password. Let's see if Snowflake allows me to just put a special character on the end. All right, cool. So we've hopefully now unlocked that account. It's still locked. Let's see. Sorry about this active troubleshooting. This is before. If anybody knows how to unlock a Snowflake account, feel free to send me some tips in the chat. All right, you know what? I'm gonna have to create a new user, I guess. All right, so witnessing active troubleshooting as we speak. Let's hope that that worked. Okay, so that user should now be unlocked. And now I just need to create a new connection. All right, so sorry about the delay there, but I think we should be ready to proceed. I'm going to catch up in the wizard. And now hopefully create a new connection to the Snowflake account. S3 samples, orders. Okay. All right, so we'll copy and paste from slide 12 in the slides. We'll grab the JDBC connection string here, which is the second example of the JDBC connection string. And we'll paste that in first. The username is workshop, all in uppercase. And the new password is what is in slide 12. So it should have a $sign at the end. You can paste that into the connection form and give it a connection name. I'm going to call this Upsolver _ Snowflake _ workshop. And test and verify that that can connect. And it cannot. Can it? It's locked again. All right. Well, this is disappointing. Yep. All right. We're going to have to create a new user. That's something I was hoping to avoid. All right, so take two. Let's try the same connectivity details, although with workshop _ PM as the username. All right, successful there. Okay, so again, I've updated the slide on slide 12 in real time with the current username and password. Hopefully that account doesn't get locked out. We try to keep these active for a few days, and hopefully that gets everyone the ability to do so. But if you use the connectivity details on slide 12, it looks like you should be able to create the Snowflake connection. Okay, so we've created the Snowflake connection with the new connectivity details. We're going to, in step 2, load data into a schema called Sandbox and go ahead and give your table some unique name. I always like to put my name at the beginning of the table name. That'll make sure that it's relatively unique. And I'm going to call this orders raw data. This first example is a pipeline where we're going to be ingesting raw data into Snowflake. So we'll give it a table name that implies that this is raw data. Just make sure you've got your name or some unique identifier at the beginning of the table name so that you don't overwrite anyone else's data. So we'll click next. That should now allow us to proceed in the ingestion wizard. And on this third screen here, we are going to leave all defaults. We'll spend a little bit more time on this screen later in the workshop, but the idea is we want to show you the simplest method for ingesting raw data. And in doing so, we're going to take all of the defaults at ingestion time to load raw data into a Snowflake table, and we'll just go ahead and click next. Okay. Now, what the wizard actually does is it generates a few lines of simple configuration code. We'll spend a little bit more time with this code later in the workshop. For now, just go ahead and click run. But if you're curious, you can, of course, read through the code and see where your configuration parameters stepped in. So we'll go ahead and click run. Assuming no further issues, it should create the ingestion job for us and start ingesting data from S3 and into Snowflake. And you'll see there's a link here to monitor job progress. If you click on that, it'll open up our monitoring UI. It'll take a few minutes or so for data to start to present, but once it does, you'll start to see the process of data ingestion. Okay. Now I am going to launch that poll one more time, especially since we did have that issue creating the Snowflake connection. If anyone can reply to the poll, let me relaunch this. That'll just let me know, hopefully, that we've got everybody caught up to where we are. The ingestion pipeline's been built out with the new connection details, and we're currently on the job monitoring UI waiting for data to begin processing. All right, excellent. We've got 100%. So that's good news. Again, thanks for bearing with me during the connectivity struggle there. It was unplanned. All right, let me end that poll. Thank you again. So as we're waiting for data to ingest, I will just kind of talk you through the data that we're working with here through this example. The data, as we saw in the ingestion form, is made up of JSON files. Right? Now, even though these are files on S3, we can think of this as a streaming ingestion because these files are being loaded into that S3 bucket constantly, right? 24/7, minute by minute, files are being loaded into S3 that Upsolver is going to be ingesting it and processing for us. The data is made up of JSON events, and this is kind of fictional generated e-commerce data. So you'll see a sample of a JSON event here in the screenshots. We've got some root data fields like net total and tax rate of numeric data types. We have some string data types like order ID, order type. We have some timestamps that's included in this data set. We also have a nested field here referenced as customer, where you'll see an email address, a first name, and a last name nested inside of the customer field. You'll also see a second level of nesting here with an address field. And then also over on the right, you'll see a items array within this JSON. So this is an array of items. It could have anywhere from 1 to n items within it. And that items array contains all of the items that make up a particular order. Right? So this isn't a very large JSON event, but it does have a variety of data types and a variety of structures that we can work with. And we'll see how Upsolver is going to automatically parse, process, and eventually ingest into Snowflake for us. Right? There was a question that came through in the chat about Iceberg formats. Currently, Upsolver doesn't support Iceberg as a source for data ingestion. Upsolver is actively working on supporting Iceberg as a target. So a very common use case would be to ingest raw data from like Kinesis or Kafka or some file source, and then create Iceberg data lake tables as a target that we can load data into. That's actually being currently developed. I actually saw a preview of it this morning. We expect to have it out in the coming weeks. So definitely stay tuned if you're interested in writing data to Iceberg tables. Upsolver should be supporting that very shortly. So thanks for that question. Keep them coming. Let me go ahead and clear my annotations here, and we'll jump back into the UI. Some of your screens may have automatically refreshed. If you don't want to wait for the auto refresh, you can certainly manual refresh. And you should start to see some data start to populate, right? We've discovered 4,000 files. We've written 1,300 rows to our target table. You can see some useful metric graphs like a delay graph tracking how far behind our target is. We expect this to be a near real-time data ingestion, so we should see that delay kind of shrink as we get started. And then as we process data over time, we'd expect it to be near zero. We can see an event handling graph telling us how many events we've processed during this ingestion pipeline. There's some utilization metrics. And as we keep scrolling down, we have visibility into any errors generated by the ingestion process itself. So you can do all of your kind of tuning, troubleshooting, debugging of this ingestion process right from this job monitoring UI. Right? To get back to your list of jobs, there's a jobs button over on the left-hand side. We only have the one job created right now, but as we build more jobs, you can see them all here, along with some high-level details about how they're running and if there's any delay or backlog and any sort of event handling or error counts. And you can jump back into the monitoring UI by clicking on the job itself, and you'll get back to that screen that we just showed. Now, that's one type of observability that Upsolver provides. There's a second type of observability that we like to highlight around data quality, right? Not just the observability of the pipeline itself and the ingestion processing, but what is actually the data that we're ingesting into Snowflake, right? We can access that by opening up a worksheet and starting to explore the data that we're writing to Snowflake, right? If you click on this worksheets tab, you'll see kind of a first option. Do you want to start from a blank worksheet or from a template? Go ahead and choose the blank option. And you'll see we're going to be working with some code over here on the right here in a few minutes. But to start with this worksheet, check out the connection list over on the left. Right? To start, you should really just have the 4 connections that we see here. 2 of them are system connections that we'll be looking at later. We've got some logs and we've got some system objects that you can programmatically query for. And then you'll see the S3 connection that we're reading data from and the Snowflake connection that we're writing data to. And if you browse through that Snowflake connection and navigate through the sandbox schema, you should see the table that you're writing data to, right? The table that you are writing data to should be bold, right? If it's not bold, you may have to refresh the connection tree, refresh that Snowflake connection, and it should show up. But you can find the table that you're writing data to. It's sorted alphabetically, but just look for the one that's in bold and click on the table name to start browsing through some interesting statistics, okay? When you click on the table, you see a small card of information down towards the bottom, but you'll see this little double arrow here that's highlighted, and you can click on that to expand the view and view some additional statistics. This will fill in over time as we start to ingest more and more data, become more useful. But even for now, we've ingested the first little bit of data from that S3 source. And you can see we've automatically inferred statistics from the source data that we're reading. Right? These are all the fields that we found in that source JSON in the first column there. We've automatically identified the data type of each of those ingested fields. And we're showing you useful metrics like, for example, the density of data within that field, right? 100% density means that every row that we've written into Snowflake has a non-null value within that column. Many data sources we would expect to have 100% density, right? We don't expect to have any null values, and this is where you can verify whether or not that's the case. Right? As we scroll down the list of columns here, the first one that maybe starts to jump out at us is this column here, phone NO, which has a density of 0.3%. So in a very small volume of rows, do we actually have values inside of this column? Now, this is a generated example of what may happen when a column name changes in your source files, right? Either a developer has actually changed the column moving forward, or maybe you've got different types of applications writing similar but not equal data within these source files, and they can't agree upon what to name specific columns, right? And this will tell you that we've got phone NO and phone number as two different columns with conflicting densities. This is an example of a data quality problem that we might want to address, and we'll show you how to do that later in the workshop. Okay. As you keep scrolling down, you can see some other interesting things like the email address field here. If you scroll this table to the right, you can see actual email addresses being ingested in plain text. Now, this may not be a quality problem, but this could be a security problem, right? Maybe there's some personally identifiable information that we want to have removed or masked as we ingest it into our data warehouse, and we'll show you how to handle that. And if we keep scrolling to the right, you'll see things like the number of distinct values that we have within our source data. That can be helpful, especially for dimension fields where you expect to have a certain number of values, and you can reference whether or not you've got the number that you expect. Maybe you've got a dimension, you should only have 5 different distinct values, and you've got 6, right? And if we keep scrolling, you'll see these first seen and last seen timestamps. This is really helpful if you do have any of those schema evolution or data drift examples where this will tell you the exact timestamp when we first saw a non-null value within a source field and when we've last seen a non-null value within a source field. In the event, again, that a column name changes, you'll know the exact point in time when that change occurred, because you'd see a first seen with the new column have a more recent timestamp, or I should say an equivalent timestamp as the last seen of the old column, right? Or if there's a problem where all of a sudden all of your source data started to appear as null, you'd see the exact timestamp of when you last saw your last non-null value. These timestamps can be really useful for simple debugging and diagnostic purposes. If you need to go back to a source data team and say, hey, as of this point in time, we stopped receiving data within this field. Or also, Upsolver provides a lot of nice capabilities for replay or data correction. And knowing these timestamps might allow you to know when do you need to reprocess data from, right? If you know the point in time that data stopped appearing or something changed in your source data, you can now replay that data from that point forward. Okay. So these are some of the table level statistics that we have. You can also drill down beyond the table. If you open up the table, you'll see column level statistics. And so a few things that I'll call out here. If you actually click on the order type column, notice you've got some inconsistency between values within that source data. We're giving you a distribution of data within that column. Now, there are 4 distinct values within this order type field, but notice we've got inconsistency in terms of upper and lowercase. This may not be a problem, but if you're doing any sort of case-sensitive aggregations, this could be, right? If we aggregate on a case-sensitive uppercase value, we're going to be missing all of the records that happen to be lowercase. So this could be another issue that we might want to correct at ingestion time. Also, if you drill down into something like, let's drill down into customer, address, and state. So far, this data doesn't look that bad, but let's say somebody running a report against this data is starting to notice some strange values in this report. You know, for better or worse, this is how a lot of data problems actually get detected. We try to detect them as upstream as we can, as upstream as we can, but sometimes the user running a report just sees something they shouldn't, right? Maybe they see we're aggregating sales by state and we see something in a report that is not a valid state, right? Now we could go back to the Snowflake table, but let's actually in Upsolver look at the data ingestion statistics. And if we page through this distribution of data, we can see so far things look okay, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. But as we step through these pages, notice that at the tail end, we start to see some things that aren't states, right? Not only are they not 2-character abbreviations, they're not states at all. So we certainly have some invalid source data that we're ingesting, and we'll take a look at how we might want to handle that during the ingestion process when we build out our second pipeline. So this is a lot of the observability that we provide on data ingestion. And this is fairly unique for an ingestion platform. A lot of this observability historically has been done against the data warehouse. We kind of have to wait for data to be ingested and then run a lot of very heavy queries against our warehouse or sample data within the warehouse to view these types of statistics. Here, Upsolver is actually presenting, I should say, all these statistics at ingestion time, and it's readily available. The other thing I do like to highlight now that we have enough data ingested is that everything is time specific. So if your downstream user maybe noticed a data problem during a 5-minute window, you can zoom in on that window in Upsolver. And here we can now see the 544 values that were ingested during that particular time range. And again, see that distribution of data, but centered on the time range that we focused in on. So there are going to be times where we want to view data quality statistics over the entirety of the data ingestion, but there are going to be lots of other times where you want to focus in on a subset of time. We make that very easy as you navigate through the statistics. Now, one other thing I do want to highlight, if you look at slide 17 in the slide deck that we shared out, there's actually a block of SQL that you can copy and paste into your worksheet. Because I do like to highlight that while we were looking in the UI at all of our data quality metrics and observability, much of that is also exposed through system tables that we can query ourselves. And here's an example where we're selecting from a system table within our insights database called data set column statistics. We're filtering on the connection name and filtering on the column names that I want to specifically look at. And when you run that query against Upsolver system tables, sorry, I think I might have butchered the name here. Let me take out this where clause for a second. Just make sure I didn't improperly name something. Still not showing anything. So we must have just a delay in processing. I'm guessing within a minute or so, we should start to see these insight statistics appear. So let me actually hold off on that use case. We'll come back to it here in a few minutes, and we should be able to see some of that data begin to appear. But again, all of the data ingestion statistics are also going to be available in a set of system tables and system catalogs. We can programmatically access them through the Upsolver UI, or we're not going to spend any time on this during the workshop today, but we also will have the ability to run Upsolver queries through a CLI, through a Python SDK, even through DBT plugin that we provide if you want to externally access any of the metrics that Upsolver presents in these system tables and maybe export them into a separate infrastructure. Okay. All right, so that's the end of our first pipeline. The second example that I want to go through is where we're going to ingest the exact same data into Snowflake, but we're going to look at ways that Upsolver can improve the quality of that data during the ingestion process, right? And we'll do that by applying some inline transformations and something Upsolver calls an expectation to that data ingestion to try and fix some of the data problems that we saw as we were looking into the data that was generated, or sorry, that was ingested, right? So let's jump back into Upsolver. You can click on the Upsolver logo in the upper left-hand corner, and that will get us back to our job listing. And you'll see, again, the button in the upper right-hand corner now to build a new job. And so we're going to create a new job and use the exact same source and target. And we're actually going to configure our source the exact same way that we did prior. All right, so same connection that we've already created. We'll select the Upsolver samples bucket. We'll read the orders with evolution location. Again, everything should dynamically preview, and we can click next in our ingestion wizard. Right, so again, the exact same source setup here. Upsolver samples, order with evolution, should automatically find some JSON files and events, and then go ahead and click next. We're also going to use the exact same Snowflake connection in the sandbox and creating a table in the sandbox schema. Just give your table a different name, right? Again, use the same prefix. That'll make it a little easier to find, but maybe let's call this orders high quality data, right? Call it whatever you'd like, just something that you'll recognize when you go through your data ingestion, right? And now we'll spend just a few extra minutes here on this step 3. Remember, in the prior example, we took all of the defaults on this screen to effectively do a raw data ingestion. But here we'll see some options that we have to configure this ingestion. First of all, we can configure how often we update our Snowflake tables with the ingested data. The default here is a near real-time ingestion, but you can scale that back. Some customers are very cost conscious in how often they write data into Snowflake. And so if you don't need real-time data in your Snowflake analysis, you might be able to save some Snowflake costs by scaling back this frequency, right? Maybe this is a data we only need to update every 6 hours instead of 1 minute. So you can scale that back, right? In our example, though, let's keep this real time since that's our default. The next column here is a timestamp field that we can automatically add to every row that we ingest into Snowflake. This may be redundant with a timestamp field that you already have in your source data, but this can also add a guaranteed, strongly ordered timestamp into every row that we write into Snowflake. And where that's especially useful is if you need to do time-based transformations or build any kind of incremental models in Snowflake on the ingested data, right? Having this strongly ordered guaranteed timestamp field or timestamp column along with every row can be used for that purpose. If you don't need it or you think it's redundant, you can turn it off, but I consider that a best practice to add that timestamp in. The second option here is that we have deduplication, all right? So with file-based sources especially, deduplication can be a challenge. You might actually have the same event located in multiple files, or maybe the same file was written twice with a different file name. So you can specify a dedupe key here. For example, we'll use order ID as kind of like a primary key on ingestion, and then specify that we should not have the same duplicate order ID over a 1-minute interval, right? And I often find that as customers do data ingestion into Snowflake, oftentimes one of the first transformations that they perform is to dedupe all of the raw ingested data. Here we can handle deduplication during the ingestion itself. And if you scroll down, you'll see here the schema dialog. Now, again, the default is to take everything from the source and write it into the target in its raw form. But here we can start to apply some inline transformations. For example, if you recall, we were writing email addresses in plain text. Maybe we don't want or can't do that for security reasons. So see, I can take any field here and simply click the hash button, and it'll apply a hashing function to that string so that it's not written to the data warehouse in plain text, right? Similarly, there might be some columns that we want to exclude from our ingestion, right? Maybe we don't want to write first name or last name. We just want the hashed email address to be written into Snowflake. So just deselect them. You'll also, if you recall, there were some metrics that we had ingested into Snowflake that were lower than 100% density. That means there were some volume of null values within that column. And you might want to do something, for example, to set an expectation that we expect this discount rate field to be not null. Right? You can click the expectation button. You can see here, we expect that field to be not null. And then you can configure what you want to have happen if a null value is detected. The default is to continue to load that data into Snowflake, but generate a warning, which we can programmatically access through system tables. But you could also say, I want to drop the event altogether, right? If we get a null value in this field, maybe that's a significant enough problem that we don't want the data loaded into Snowflake. And this would give you that capability during the expectation configuration. So you can step through this schema dialog, deselect the fields you want to exclude, hash the fields that you want to hash, maybe set up some not null expectations. And then you'll see if you click next here, it's going to generate you a new ingestion job, but that adds a few lines of configuration based on what you've specified, right? Most specifically, you'll see the exclude columns configuration, where you just list out the columns you want to exclude. You'll see the deduplicate with configuration, where you specify the columns you want to dedupe by and the window over which you want to dedupe. And then you'll see the column transformations logic, which allows you to define expressions that calculate any sort of transformation that you want to perform at ingestion time on a particular column or list of columns. Lastly, you'll see the expectation logic here, where again, we can specify a particular column and basically say we expect that to be not null. And if it is null, simply generate a warning, right? And so here you see an example of how the wizard can kind of build out this very simple configuration code. Now, again, we could run this as is, but you'll also see a link here to edit this within a worksheet. And if you go ahead and click on that, it'll open up a worksheet with the code that you generated. And we can now start adding to this if we'd like, right? Maybe we want to add additional expectations or additional transformations. And I've got a slightly more sophisticated example here on slide 19 within the slides. So if you want to jump to slide 19, you can copy the entire code block there and paste that over top the generated code in your worksheet. I'll just ask you to make one change here. If you look at change at line 16, the line that says into Snowflake, you may just want to, again, update the table name that we're creating in Snowflake, right? So I'm going to, again, call this JSON orders cleaned data, just to make sure that that table name is unique. Right, but when you update your table name, the rest of the code you should just be able to run as is. I'm going to go ahead and run it. Looks like my connection name is not valid. What did I call my connection name? I must have typoed that. Let me paste. No, I called it Upsolver. So that was actually probably why my insights query didn't work earlier. So there you can see I've updated the connection name, updated the table name. You can, of course, make sure that you're referencing the right connection and right table. But now this updated ingestion job is starting to process and ingest higher quality data into Snowflake. If you look at the column transformations here, actually, I'll start with exclude columns. In this case, what we're actually excluding, if you remember back to those quality statistics that we showed you, we had two different column names for phone number, one of very low density. So we're actually going to exclude the invalid column name. And if you look at this line here on line 8, we're going to coalesce those two column names together so that we have a consistent phone number field, right? Coalesce is a function. It takes any number of arguments, but it takes the first non-null value. So it'll either take phone number or phone NO, depending on what's in the source event, but we'll get a consistent result of phone number with 100% density. You can also see we can do some data type conversion with these inline transformations. If you want to convert maybe numeric precision or convert strings to dates or dates to strings or numbers to strings, you can do data type conversions. We can also do any sort of string function call here. Here we can convert all of the order type values to lowercase, so we can address that case sensitivity problem. And then you'll also see down towards the bottom these expectations. The first is what we configured in the UI, but here you'll see a second expectation where we are checking the length of the state string right? Making sure that that equals 2. And if it doesn't, we're going to drop the record from the data ingestion, right? Again, we had all those invalid states that were causing problems in our dashboarding and reporting. So by setting this expectation, it'll make sure that those invalid states are not written into Snowflake. Right? So now this job is going to run for us, ideally ingesting, higher quality data into our Snowflake warehouse. And if we browse through our Snowflake connection, again, you may have to refresh the catalog to have your new table show up. But it looks like, sure enough, I've got my new table here, Jason's ordered clean data. If I click on that and again, expand the view into full screen, we haven't ingested very much yet, but we can already start to see some improvements, right? Notice the phone number column is now showing with 100% density, right? Again, we're coalescing the 2 phone number fields into a single column. Notice if we look at the email address, even this top value here is showing as a hashed version of the email, right? So no longer do we have emails written in plain text. If we scroll down through these statistics, and let's actually open the left-hand tree. If we go to order type, notice everything is now written in lowercase and we only have 2 distinct values. And if we navigate through that customer record and look at address and then state, notice if we page through all of this value distribution, we no longer have any of those invalid states being ingested into our warehouse because the expectation that we configured is discarding them from the data ingestion. So this will now continue to run over time. You've now got both ingestion jobs running, the raw data op version and the better data version. And you can certainly, as this continues to run in your workshop in this environment, you can, again, track the status of those tables and kind of see the improvements that have been made in data quality. Okay. Now, 2 other kind of system function calls that I want to show you. Hopefully, these are now working given my proper catalog name. If I go ahead and say select star from system.monitoring.expectations. This monitoring database is a set of monitoring related tables, one of which shows us the status of expectations that we've configured. And we may have, we've already got some violations here, so that's good. So we've got 2 expectations. Again, the first one generated a warning, saw a null value within whenever we saw null value within the discount rate field. We've seen that 694 times so far. And then the second expectation is what's removing those invalid states. We've seen 12 of those so far that we've dropped. In other words, we have not loaded Snowflake. Right, so there you can see 2 examples of the expectations along with how many times they've triggered and what the action that was taken on that expectation. Right. The other system connection I'll show, hopefully this is now working, is from .insights.set column statistics. Let's just run this without a filter first. Perfect. And now let's come in here and say where catalog. Let me actually go grab the SQL from slide 12 again, I believe. No, what slide? Slide 17, I'm going to grab this SQL here, paste this, update my catalog name to be what and now we should see statistics for these 2 columns, right? The postal code column and the state column. And specifically, I'll call you out to the fact that you see the two different data sets that we're writing data into with the 2 different column names. And if you scroll to the right, you'll see a lot of the metrics exposed that we saw in the UI, right? So density, total values, max and min, number of distinct. And then you'll see the data distribution metrics appear as a JSON column. But if you keep scrolling to the right, you'll see these length distributions. This is especially useful for string values. And if we look at the first state field in the raw data table, you can see that most of the states, 679,000 of them, were 2-character strings, but we have several other buckets of differing character lengths with the rest of the invalid states. And if I look at the last one here, there's no mouse over because there's just a single bucket that contains all states with a string length of 2. All So you can go ahead and kind of view a lot of those statistics that we saw in the UI now programmatically by querying system tables and system catalogs that we make available. So that's basically what I wanted to show during the session today. I'll leave you with a few last items, and then we will go ahead and answer the rest of the questions that have come through. First of all, is kind of where do you go from here, right? So this environment that you've currently spun up and are using is going to be available for you for the next 14 days that you can run additional testing in. You can feel free to connect to your own sources and your own targets if you'd like. If you go back to the ingestion wizard, for example, you'll see some database connections that you can work with. Maybe you want to connect to a PostgreSQL system and write into Snowflake. You can go through the ingestion wizard and set that up accordingly. You'll also see some buttons down the left-hand side of the UI where you can go for help. There's a help button here where you can do some inline chat with our support team if you run into a problem or have an issue or need an error that you help debugging. There's also a button here to schedule a 30-minute demo with myself or someone on my team if you'd like to spend a bit more time kind of working through any particular use case or one-on-one question and answer. The resources button here gives you some access to our documentation, the full documentation, a syntax reference guide, as well as a tutorial video. And if you go all the way over to the right-hand side of the screen, the question mark here gives you a few extra links, as well as the ability to join our Slack community. You'll see the Ask on Slack button there. That's a good way to get kind of direct access to our Slack community where you can ask further questions or collaborate with other users of Upsolver. The other thing I wanted to call out is right now, everything that you've done here in this workshop is running in Upsolver's cloud, right? This is a SaaS cloud that we've built for the purpose of customers being able to run data ingestion without having to allocate any of their own cloud resources. There is a configuration in Upsolver. If you go to the account settings, you'll see a cloud integration page. And this is where you can start the process of integrating Upsolver into your AWS account. Right, you click the Start Integration button, answer a few questions about the VPC that you want to deploy to. Then Upsolver will generate you a CloudFormation template that you can run in AWS to have all of the Upsolver resources now running in your VPC. And there's a lot of advantages to that, especially for production use cases. You get full governance and ownership of how the ingestion processes are going to scale. Also, if the data processing runs in your VPC, all of the data is secured by your VPC, right? No data has to leave your VPC firewall. You can use your own encryption keys. You can protect everything as you normally would your own cloud resources. So especially for high security environments or environments where you want to maintain complete oversight over the data processing, the cloud VPC deployment is a really great option. Last thing I'll leave you with is just a link to follow us on LinkedIn. We are very active in the LinkedIn community. That's generally one of the best places to go if you want to keep up to date with future webcasts or future workshops or future content that we're putting out there. So both the QR code and a link. If you want to get connected to us, please follow our page. It's a good way to kind of get synced up and connected to Upsolver. I think I've actually answered all the questions that have come through in real time. There's one question left, and that was about target support. Does Upsolver support targets like Elasticsearch, New Relic, etc.? Just for clarity, I will bring up the ingestion UI. You will see we do have a target to Elasticsearch. So if you want to ingest from a file source and write events into an Elasticsearch index, we do support that as an ingestion process. We do not currently have ingestion to New Relic. Now, New Relic as a monitoring platform would typically be used for like alerting and notification. We do actually have two monitoring integrations. It's not an ingestion workflow, but there is an integration that allows you to write metrics and logs to currently CloudWatch and or Datadog. New Relic can certainly be considered as another option if there's enough demand for it. So certainly let us know if that's the case, and we'll look into prioritizing that. But we currently have monitoring integrations should you want to send details to CloudWatch and or Datadog. And I should also mention that all of the API accesses that I showed you around system tables, logs, monitoring, those commands can be run by either a CLI call or a Python SDK. So those of you that might be familiar or comfortable writing CLI scripts or Python scripts, you might be able to integrate some of our data into New Relic by leveraging those SDKs. So that would be another option for you. So I know we're a couple minutes after, but I want to appreciate everyone's time today. I'll stick around for another 30 seconds or so if any last questions come up. But if not, I hope everyone enjoyed the session today and look forward to speaking with you further. Thanks.